Okay, next up we're going to have Captain Mike Worrell from the Phoenix Fire Department speak, and he's going to talk about the interoperability after the tragedy.
Like Karen said, this is after the tragedy. This isn't during the Yarnell fire, so it's a whole other can of worms. So I've been with the Phoenix Fire Department since 1986, and when I first started with Phoenix Fire Department, I'd just gotten out of the service, and so I got a job as a communications technician with them, so that's where my background was. So I'm kind of an odd duck. I'm in operations, I have this heavy technical background. So in 1993, I became a firefighter, and 2001, I was promoted to captain, and sorry, the phone's right here. Okay. Just make sure they can hear you on the webcam. But in the early 90s, we formed our FEMA USAR team. You're familiar with Urban Search and Rescue? Those are the teams that go out to the World Trade Center, the Oklahomas, and so I've been out on all that stuff, and I'm also part of their FEMA incident support team. I initially learned all my electronics while I was in the Navy. I went to the Navy recruit, and they said, what do you want to do? And they opened this big catalog and book, and they started showing me pictures, and there's a guy standing there with doing this, and it looked like it was cool, so I go, I'll do that. So, had a plan. I'm also on the First Aid Public Safety Advisory Committee. That's public safety's input into the development of the FirstNet national broadband system. So I'm basically representing the fire service needs. I'm also on the Arizona Public Safety Communications Advisory Committee as a commissioner, and that's the meeting that's after this one later today. And me and another guy wrote a voice communications guide for the fire service, and that was published by FEMA, and I think that was a few years ago. And I have an associate's degree in electronics. So during this, Brian had a great intro on this. He kind of set the stage for what happened. We lost 19 firefighters during the Yarnell fire. It's not about this presentation, not about the Yarnell fire, but we're going to discuss the communications issues that surrounded it and the things that happened during the memorial service and all the influx of help that came from the state. And we had some national level support also. So the initial plan, Phoenix Fire and Police, we're going to escort the procession up to Prescott, Arizona, Prescott Valley. The initial deployment period was 1 day. Like Brian said, it's important to include the COMLs in your initial planning processes. When I work with FEMA, a lot of times we get plopped in a place where that isn't always the case. So when you look at COMLs and you're going to select somebody to be a COML, you need to select the people that are going to understand what briefings that they should be at, where they need to be, what they need to look for, because there are instances where someone say, hey, you're not part of operations, you don't need to be in this brief. Well, if I'm here to support you, I'm providing your communications needs, I need to know what you're doing. So, we'll talk more about that later. So this initial deployment period was 1 day. So what factors, for an IC or operations section chief, what factors do you need to look at that are going to trigger you to say, hey, I think I need a COML? Well, operating with non-standard partners, because those non-standard partners are people that may not be operating on your radio system. They may be operating on completely different frequency bands. So you need to get somebody to take a look and see what they have, what the common threads are, and how you bring your ability to talk to them. Multiple partners. And a lot of times I mean like multiple disciplines. We're talking about fire, PD. Do we talk the same language? No. Does a police officer and, say, somebody from the Defense Department, a Marine Corps guy, do they speak the same language? If you say cover me to him, it means different than cover me for a Marine Corps guy. A Marine Corps guy may lay down a swab of 50 cal for you, and you don't necessarily want that. So it's important to start taking a look at those things. Another one's operating outside of your normal area of operations. Because we're used to operating, for Phoenix Fire, Phoenix PD, we operate here in the valley. We have a radio system that supports what we do, does very well at it. And if we go out of area, what happens? We're not in our area anymore. We don't have that radio system to support us. So if I take my trunk radio and I go up to Prescott Valley or Prescott, how good is that trunk radio anymore? It doesn't work up there because the system isn't there to support it. So that's when you start needing COMLs. Justin spoke about it's not just, these interoperability problems, but when you start having large command structures that get complex, get multiple divisions and branches, those may signify a need for a COML. High-risk operations, you have EOD, hazmat, TRT operations. They sometimes have special communications needs. So, for instance, our TRT, we operate with our Phoenix PD partners. We pick people off the mountaintops. One of the things we do, we don't operate on trunk channels when we do that. Why wouldn't we operate on trunk channels, do you think? When I key up a trunk radio, the system has to go out, allocate the resources for me to talk on the system to do that. There's a delay there. If I'm setting a guy down in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, I key up and I'm going to say stop, and it goes beep. I may not get access to that channel when I need it. So we use simplex operations where we have immediate access. And that's one of those technical things that a COML can help you figure out, what you need for those things. Aircraft operations, I didn't include the slide, but Ryan, I saw on the slide, was Vigilant Guard. We were operating with some DOD assets, some helicopters. So they got in this planning meeting and they had this crazy diagram with letters, all these arrows and different things to operate with aircraft. Aircraft signify need for a COML because aircraft carry specific types of radios. They may not carry what you have, so there may be a need to have a COML to help figure that out. So, identification of COML early in the event is pretty key. Because when they get in there in that initial planning process, they're included in that operational plan, they're able to identify things that may help the communications. They may tell the operations section chief, hey, we aren't going to be able to support that. So allows for information gathering, including the operational plans, briefings, and review. I was in a situation in Katrina. I got deployed to Katrina. So we go down there. Operations hadn't included us in they had some side meetings, they didn't include us. Well, one of the things they wanted to do is they wanted to deploy from New Orleans down to 75 miles down the coast, but they wanted to talk all the way back. What was the infrastructure in New Orleans after Katrina? It was white slick. So there was nothing there that we couldn't support it. So a COML will sometimes have to stand up and say, we can't support that mission. And that's a bad thing for you to do in the end when you're at your final planning meeting and you're going, can you support the mission? And they stand up and say no. You don't want that to happen. So it lets them see what jurisdictions are involved, because what jurisdictions are involved are going to determine what communications capabilities for each jurisdiction. So for instance, DPS has a capability. They're on UHF, Phoenix Fire has VHF, Phoenix PD was on 800. So that is a communications problem. It also allows for some time to do frequency research. If you come up as an operations section chief, hey, we're going to be operating with Phoenix PD, Gilbert PD, Prescott PD, and we need to talk right now. Well, if that doesn't give your COML time to do that research, to be able to connect all the dots together and give you the ability to talk. So you need time to develop and implement the solution. The other thing it does is sometimes when you have these complex communications problems, they may have to get additional resources. It may be equipment, it may be personnel, the technical help person that Justin was talking about. It may be actually acquiring frequencies. There may be a common frequency between all the different jurisdictions that will work, but they may not be on their home frequency. So you may have to get permission for a frequency. So when the operations section chief, one of the first things I do as a COML, and this gets back to COMLs going to these ICS classes. It's one thing to go to ICS, but it's another thing to be involved in the ICS as far as being in an incident or an operation, because it lets you understand this better, this organizational chart. Because when you look at this organizational chart, you're able to see what functional groups are there that need to talk to each other. It lets you identify what networks of communications are there, or should be there. So for instance, as a command net, you might need the IC, law enforcement, and fire to talk together as an overall command net at the strategic level. But at the tactical level, DPS may be on a UHF and maybe doing some tactical objective down here. So the COML, working with the operations section chief, is able to develop this organizational chart, and sometimes communication has an impact on the way those tactical objectives are assigned to different agencies or jurisdictions. So, what are the operational requirements? Is interoperability required? Are you operating interdiscipline? Is it multidiscipline? And do you see a problem? I mean, do you see a problem here? When you look at this section right here of law enforcement, do we have a problem there? Well, what's the problem? You have DPS on UHF, Phoenix PD on 800 trumped, Prescott Valley PD on VHF. So that's a problem. So that's a problem for the COML. And that's also something, a flag for you to say, hey, I need a COML to get out there and figure this out for me. So then on the fire side, we had Phoenix Fire, Prescott Fire, and Prescott Valley Fire. So what's the COML role? Brian said it. It's to support operations. That's what we're there for. We're there to make the operations safer, making sure operations can communicate, allocate resources to mitigate whatever problem is out there. The other thing is, what are the priorities? There may be, in that organizational chart, there may be a logistics net. Is that the priority for the operations section chief? Probably not. So what are his priorities as who needs to talk to who first? Justin also talked in the introduction about COML doing data and video and voice. Which of those are most important to the operations section chief? Probably voice. And one of the things I tell the COMLs that work with me is that when you get out there, you need to do an assessment. Part of that assessment is determining what those priorities are to the operations section chief. As a COML, they need to know the resources, probably within a 100-mile radius. Because if I'm traveling from here to Prescott, that's in my 100-mile footprint, and I ought to know what's up there. And what should I know about? The people and the things that are up there. Because the people are as much a resource as the things are. Because when I go up there, if I need to access the Prescott's radio system, who do I call? Well, those are things that you should know. So, one of the things we need to do is provide interoperability if required. Do we always need interoperability on an incident? It gets back to that organizational chart. For the DPS guys that are right there, if they're assigned a specific tactical objective, do they need interoperability with everybody on this organizational chart? They don't. Now, there's one supervisor made to coordinate what that whole agency is doing on that incident, but not the whole unit themselves. So one of those things was sort out frequency difference. So we talked about that. Find the commonalities. So a lot of, we'll talk about this in a minute. A lot of it may be detective work. Technical solutions. How many of you know some real technical guys that speak really technical language, and when you talk to them, you can't understand them at all? You got to watch out for those guys. Sometimes they'll throw technical solutions at you when you don't really need them, when it may be simple as, hey, here's another radio, you're going to have to listen to 2 channels to talk on. Or, what's the lowest level of interoperability? What is it? I heard something. Face-to-face. So if I sit a PD guy and a fire guy right next to each other, can they coordinate their operations and allocation of resources to handle a problem? Sure. That's the lowest level of interoperability, and sometimes that's the most effective. So when we operate with PD, sometimes we'll operate in the same command view right next to each other. So keep it simple, common channels, swap radios. Sometimes you may require people to use 2 radios. When we put these technical solutions into place, it requires manpower. So if I place, one of the things I'm big on is I put a patch in place where I patch 2 channels together, and one of the radios goes bad in the patch. What happens to the other end that it's patched to? It's bad also. So now I've locked up two resources. So I'm big on monitoring these technical solutions so that if something happens, there's somebody that can break it or fix it. So it's a manpower issue. So the goal is to determine what that achievable interoperability goal is and communicate those capabilities to operations to support their operation. So on Saturday, July 6th, so procession planning for the drive to Prescott, convoy length was going to be 20 hearses, law enforcement, fire support, and how long was that procession? 1.5 miles. Route was going to be I-17. So as a comm guy, I'm thinking, okay, I-17, okay, what agents do we have? We have DPS, Phoenix Fire, Phoenix PD Air Unit, DPS Ranger, Prescott units, and I wasn't sure which one. So now I'm thinking, oh, how are we going to talk together? So what are my interoperability issues? So these are the things that are going through your COML's mind. I have DPS on UHF, at Phoenix PD that's on 7 and 800, Phoenix Fire on 7, 800 and VHF, Prescott PD is on VHF. So, what do we have in the state of Arizona that provides interoperability? Arizona Interoperable Radio System. And that's only if what? If all the radios that are programmed with those channels in there. So that's the next piece of detective work, is that now the COML has to go out and touch each of those agencies or touch their radio and find out if that channel's in there. So some of the considerations that I'm thinking, and this is when you look at your COMLs and you're selecting COMLs and when you're bringing COMLs up, is you want to nurture some of this, is to have them recognize and anticipate some of the operational needs before they happen so they can start planning for them. So that takes a load off of him so he doesn't actually have to go, I need you to provide interoperability between me, DPS, and this for this operation, because, you know, the COML should be able to anticipate that, plan for it, have it in their back pocket when he asks for it. So interoperability between all the motor officers and fire. Traveling up together, we all want to make sure that we can all speak to each other. The next thing is we're operating out of a normal operational area. So it requires common channels for a technical solution, or a technical solution. So common channels, with all those agencies on different frequency bands, am I going to have a common channel there? No. Not unless we use an AIRS channel that patches everything together, which is that technical solution. So now what resources does that need, the COML need, to make that interoperability happen? So disparate frequencies or no common frequency. So AIRS is one solution, but now I need to know what the coverage footprint of AIRS is. Does it cover that whole route going up I-17 and all the way into Prescott Valley? Do all the participants have AIRS programmed in their radios? So now, I always tell COML when I teach this class, they say, hey, if you have a solution, you always need a backup. What's your backup plan? So my other solution is, okay, so I'm thinking gateways, or you patch radios together. So whatever frequency they have, get one of theirs or program it into your radio, patch those things together, or swap and loan radios. And then work with each jurisdiction representative to find out where the channel location is in their radio. So, as a firefighter in the city of Phoenix, if I tell a guy, hey, where's the national interoperability channels for VHF? Do you think you're going to be able to answer my question? No, because they don't go there on a day-to-day basis. They stay on A, B, and C on the radio, and they never go to C deck or G deck or wherever. So it becomes a training issue when you're on site doing these things sometimes. And then, how many of you have been in a situation where you have a bunch of radios and your whole fleet has to be reprogrammed? So you have an agency, half their radios are reprogrammed, half of them aren't. So what happens to your channel plan? Some of them are, some of them aren't. So you run into that sometimes. So this is AIRS coverage. For that area, see how it's kind of spotty? When we look at these two as a technician, are these actual coverage footprints? Those are predictions. So they're not always true. So, Sunday, July 7th. So, July 6th, I had that plan was all set. So, we're going up, we're going to go up by 17, we're going to use AIRS, everybody's going to talk together on the AIRS channel. Good to go. Sunday, July 7th, there's a change of the route. We're going Carefree Highway through Yarnell. Does that change things for me? Yeah, AIRS doesn't cover going through Yarnell now. So now what do I do? Well, remember that backup plan I had? We still have the same interoperability partners, same interoperability issues, but the backup plan now is we're going to use that Suburban. This communication Suburban. And within that Suburban has mobile patching capability, has a mobile repeater, and satellite communications. So as a COML, I'm thinking, so what things do we need? We need convoy communications between our convoy, which is 1.5 miles long. So how am I going to achieve that? So we talked with Brian, said, hey, we need to put this vehicle kind of in the middle of the convoy. Because that way we can, if we need to, we can set up a repeater. And that convoy, if that convoy gets stretched out to 5 miles, all they have to do is hit that middle repeater and it'll get front to back coverage on that convoy. The other thing it has is mobile patching capability. So it allowed me to patch the Prescott PD officers, the DPS officers, Phoenix Fire, who else am I getting? And Phoenix PD. So all those were patched together. So it became a mobile patch with a coverage footprint that was probably about a mile long, and allowed us front to back coverage all the way going up. We do this in FEMA sometimes on long convoys. We have long convoys with a lot of equipment going. So it's just exposure to this type of application of this equipment. Some people have never seen this one. You did that and said, yeah. The other thing we need is what happens if something happens along the way where there's a vehicle broken down, somebody has a medical injury, and they need to get back to Phoenix. You also need that long-range communication. Reach back to your dispatch center or reach back to somewhere where you can get some outside help. So for that, we use satellite communications. Brian mentioned that we had satellite phones. The satellite phones we have are special. They have a phone function on them, but they also have a microphone where you key it up and it acts just like a radio. So you're talking, point to multi-point on this thing. So, COML considerations again, interoperability between the motor officers and fire. We're operating out of our normal area of operations. Requires common channels or technical solution. When we apply these technical solutions out in the field, what other issues will we have with that technical solution set? Say a repeater that someone's not normally operating on, they don't normally operate a repeater, or a patch. We come across training issues. The training issues is, say I key up a radio and say it's a voice-activated system where I have to start talking before that thing activates that patch. Well, I have to tell the motor officer, hey, speak in there, the front part of your word may be clipped because of this. They don't understand the technology behind that fix. So unless you integrate these things into some of the exercises and training things that you do, when game day happens, you have to go through all this training on site. And sometimes it's not as effective as you have the time to go through a little bit more detailed trainings and briefings and those kinds of things. So resources required, we talked about that. So disparate frequencies, AIRS had no coverage. Talk about the gateways. So operational considerations. So motor officers. So someone said, well, we'll just swap radios. Can I swap a radio with a motor officer? Why can't I swap a radio with a motor officer? They have a helmet communication system that connects to a specialized radio, so I can't just hand them a portable and say, hey, listen to this portable, and you'll have to listen to your other one too. So that was a difficulty. So the motor officers escort, DPS, Prescott Valley, Phoenix PD. Talked about that training issue about knowing where the interoperability channel was. I went to a DPS guy and I said, hey, I need to know, do you have the interoperability channels in your radio, national interoperability channels? He goes, what are those? I said, do you see anything on your radio that says UTAC or anything like that? I don't know. So take me to your motorcycle. So we go to his motorcycle and we start flipping around in there. I go, there's one right there. I said, we'll stay that from that one. So then I go to another motorcycle, we go flip his radio on. I flip through there. Well, one says UTAC 41D, the other one says UTAC 1D. So I'm like, at one point there were different naming conventions. And this is where COML, keeping up with, what's going on in the community. So, okay, 41 and 1 may be the same channel. So what do I do now? I just test those two and make sure those two work together. Those two work together, luckily. So making sure, and that gets back to that programming thing. Is all your equipment up to date, program the same. The other thing I ran across is the officer's previous experience. Like, tell us officers, hey, what we're going to do is we're going to patch all you guys together. You stop. I don't even want to hear this. I go, what do you mean? He goes, they spent $20 million in trying to get a radio system for us to operate on, and it's never working. It's not going to happen. I said, just give me a chance. So we hook everything together, get it going. And we start traveling up the hill. What was the first stop we made where it was real hot? Congress. We went to Congress. So who's the first guy I'm looking for? I'm looking for that guy. I say, hey, could you hear? He goes, yeah. He goes, I forgot. You guys are flying. You make things happen. But again, and I'm not going to say it was perfect because there were issues with it. Because remember, I talked about that training issue of keying up the radio and speaking a little bit to get that thing to open up. Well, they weren't used to that because they were operating off their normal system. They were operating on something new. They weren't familiar with it, so it caused some problems at points. Convoy IC, place communications vehicle in the convoy. We worked with Brian initially. We got there and they said, okay, you're going to be in the very back. So we have been very effective in the very back of that convoy, trying to patch from front to back. No. So technically, the best position for us was in the middle, so we worked with operations, did that coordination with operations to make that happen. So this is whenever I go on deployment, I carry a notebook in my side pocket. So you go on a deployment, you go there for 5, 7, 14 days. Can you remember the first day from the last? You're the fog of war and all that kind of stuff. Well, so I have to write the date, take my notes, and what's happened that day. I got some IP address there for something, but DPS motors, UTAC 41, it was UTAC 41 and UTAC 1A, that's what it was. But it's important to keep those records so that you know what's happened for those after-action reports. And we did have a technical issue. Remember that technical solution we talked about that needs to be monitored? Well, this cable, this thing, in this communication vehicle, there's this regular, like a computer network, these radios hooked to a computer network, a little clip on the little jack you plug into the wall. The clip busted off, and so the clip was coming out. So that's what this is. Cable N05 clip from IP 225 to the router that went bad. So there was somebody there that had to jam that thing in there and kind of tape it and stick it to make it work. And did you know that happened?
That's not common.
Yeah. So, convoy communication requirements, end-to-end communications. Why do you want end-to-end communications? Accountability. You as an IC, you need accountability for the personnel that are assigned to you. That's that safety thing. Breakdowns, logistical support. Do we have an issue with the breakdown or a medical issue during that trip up to Prescott Valley? We had a motor officer that got overheated. I think when we got to Congress, I looked at the temperature, it was like 109. A motor officer wearing that helmet, they don't have the opportunity, we're on these long trips to take their helmet off, cool off, and those kinds of things. So the officer got overheated. We had to take care of him. But we were able to maintain end-to-end communication because we had satellite communication. We had all those pieces in place. We were able to provide that mobile patch for the officers to provide intra-convoy communications, where that communication's in the convoy for these disparate radio systems. And lastly, long-range communications to our dispatch center, PD dispatch, and the Prescott Valley if we needed it. So convoy communications plan was Prescott Valley PD was going to be on a VTAC radio, and those officers, Tim, you guys use that more often, those VTACs or anything? Because when I asked their officers, hey, do you have some interoperability frequencies in your radio, they knew. So I was able to find that one immediately. Phoenix PD replaced them on an 8-TAC frequency. That's again another national interoperability frequency. These are things that your communications unit leader should know. Access to these frequencies, where they are. DPS, that UTAC, and then Phoenix Fire, I put them on this V-Fire 21. And the reason I did that was because when we got on the top of the hill in Yarnell, Prescott Valley and Prescott Fire have that radio in their communications center, and they were able to monitor our communications going into Prescott Valley from Yarnell and on. One of the things too is that I talked about knowing the communications resource with a 100-mile radius. So knowing Phoenix, I'm not a Phoenix PD officer, but I knew what they had in their radios. I had an idea what was in DPS's radios because I know some of the DPS people and know what they do. And then I knew what was in our radios. They're all patched during the convoy. Talking to Yarnell. So on arrival, IMT's in place with memorial support. There was an all hazards unit there, all hazards IMT, but the guy that was, they had little experience with local integration. They typically did wildland stuff. Their label is all hazards. They typically did wildland stuff. And then they were using National Interagency Fire Center radios. This is one of those another kind of red flags for an operations section chief. If you see a communications plan that doesn't have any of your channels on it, is that a problem for you? Yeah. Because when we showed up there, I go, where are your 205? And the guy shows me the 205 that had all 4 service frequencies on it. I said, how are you tying the fire agencies together and the PD agencies together? He goes, I don't know, this is the plan. And it's not that guy's fault. He was dropped in a situation that he wasn't trained for. So next thing, I want to make contact with the local contacts there. Do they have a TIC-P? Because the TIC-P is going to get that tactical interoperable communications plan is going to be access to information such as, do they have cache radios? Are there interoperability plans or systems in place that we can use for this incident? And then where are the dispatch centers? And also contact information for people. So now I want to develop a communications plan. So who do I need? Well, who are the players? What radios do they have? What bands are they operating in? That gets back to, with the operations section chief, how many different agencies do you have here? I need to touch them and see their radios and see what frequencies they have in their radios. And if I don't know what's in there already. And then what are the coverage requirements for the operations section chief as far as where do you need to cover? Where are these operations going to be happening? Justin talked a little bit about frequency management, frequency coordination. That's part of your COML's job. When we travel out of area, let's go back to Phoenix. So we're in Phoenix. Brian asked for a frequency. Well, how many frequencies or talk groups does the trunk system have? Tons. So not a problem here. But you go up into Prescott where we don't have a trunk system, and we have to operate on specific frequencies. Now that's become a limited resource, and that COML may have to take that resource and allocate it in different places so that it's used efficiently and maybe reused in different areas because they can use geographic separation and use one frequency over and over again in an operation. So the warning flags we got there was an all-hazards IMT wildland with a COML that wasn't familiar with the state and local resources or our procedures and protocols. And ICS 205 that doesn't address those communications with the jurisdiction in charge, and it doesn't address the interoperability. There was no integration of the communication plan with the operational plan. So the things that the operations wanted to do, that ICS 205 didn't really address that. And the only communications resources that were up there at the time were NIPSI resources. So this one-day deployment, when I got up there, and all this stuff is running through my mind, kind of making these assessments. This is a lot of work. So that one-day deployment turned into being there a week. So the assessment, many agencies required the coordination. There weren't a lot of resources up there. The workload. So I got up there. There's this one COML. He's not familiar with the urban equipment that we're going to be bringing up. So what does that mean? If I don't bring somebody else up there to assist, I want to be doing everything. I can't do everything. What are the area of operations? So I'm talking with the operations section chief up there, and Tim back there is with Prescott Valley PD. I talked with him, it was in his ear a lot, but find out, hey, where is this going to be at? Where is this happening at? The reason I'm asking those questions is because I'm trying to figure out what the terrain is, what that coverage footprint for that system needs to be for that specific operation, and how, if it's a remote location, how am I going to have reach back, touch, to maintain contact with them. And then lastly, staffing. Again, that's that workload. We're going to be long operational periods. The workload that I have, the technical solutions I put in place, are they going to require manpower to make them happen? So these operational requirements, who were the players? We had over 100 agencies that were there. What radios did they bring? They brought everything. All different brands and all different bands. So VHF, UHF, Trump, whatever. Coverage requirements. So we found out we're doing stuff in Prescott Valley, Chino Valley. What was the one we had way out in the last day? Toward Yarnell, Skull Valley area. Real poor coverage. There are all these coverage requirements. And all those change day to day depending on what that operation was for that day. The local contacts. So TICP, called the local contact up there. No cash radios available. Okay. Interoperability system. AIRS had poor coverage, didn't cover the entire area. The Phoenix RWC has some sites that has partial coverage up there, but it was spotty, so it wasn't dependable. So I didn't want to use that. And then the dispatch centers that were up there, you can use them as coordinating points for yourself. So, command structures. We talked a little bit about this earlier, about using command structures to your advantage. Division supervisors may carry 2 radios. So you may have one that's connected to strategic level command and then one that's connected to the tactical level below them, the people that are assigned to them. So we'll have a command radio and a division radio. The other thing we can do that we did a lot up there is we paired, say, a group of Phoenix motors were up there and they were assigned a single tactical objective. They got paired with the Prescott PD or Prescott Valley PD officer that maintained contact on a command radio, and then they talked on their own radios. So it provided access to the local system and gave them coverage and gave them access to the command structure. I teach COML and COMT. And one of the things they always tell these guys is, they say, when you get there, go get the ICS 201. They'll have the work chart all filled out for you. And it's on this, paper, and it's all typed up. Well, when I got up there, this is what I found. And a lot of that is the COML has to have outreach to each specific operational group to find out what's going on as far as with their operations. So this was the medical stuff that was going on around the what's the venue out there? Which one? Yeah, the Toyota Center. So this was the medical organizational chart for the 10th Toyota Center. So by looking at this, I can say, okay, I can come up with a communications plan using this organizational chart. So it's not always clean, not always pretty, but and now you can see the role of smartphones in today's. So again, using command structure and tasking to achieve interoperability. So here we had traffic, we had Prescott PD, they were on Prescott VHF 1. And we had the Prescott PD, Phoenix PD with the Prescott officer. And the Phoenix PD guys were all actually on an ATAC. But are they tied to the command structure? Yeah, because they're paired with the Prescott officer that has access to that. And we did that with a bunch of different agencies. A lot of them. So again, that takes that coordination with operations to make that happen. Because if they took these guys and they split them up, what did that just do? That took away that capability. It chopped off my legs. And this is just law enforcement. You can do that with fire and medical. So memorial service support, we had 100 different agencies. Identify the commonalities. And a lot of times time is a factor. How are you going to make this happen quickly? So one of those things is if radios are programmed up with interoperability frequencies, there's a national interoperability frequency plan that's in the NIFOG, N-I-F-O-G. And if you have a COML, they know what that is. If your radios are programmed up with that, that gives you instant access to those channels and provides some level of interoperability. Field personnel, this training thing. Remember I told you the training? Hey, where's your interoperability frequencies? If they don't know, you have to go in there and look. Or if I tell an officer or a firefighter, hey, go to, they normally operate on, this B deck. Can they navigate that radio to get those decks, way down the way in that radio? The other thing you run into is multiple agencies. Like you'll see a 205, when I put a 205 together for one of these all hazards incidents, I don't put a deck and channel number that's B16. I just put UTAC 43. What the frequency is, because if I have a DPS officer and a Phoenix PD guy, and they have both the same capability, the same band, and I put that channel, is that channel always in the same place on both radios? It's not. What you run into is those officers don't necessarily know where that specific frequency is on those radios, and sometimes it takes some help to get them there. And that's just not PD officers, it's firefighters. Operating out of area. So when you're operating out of area, you're operating on different systems that you aren't familiar with. When I'm in Phoenix, I'm on a trunk system. I key up a trunk radio. What sound does it make before I can follow? Gives you a little talk permit tone. If I'm operating up on a simplex system and I key up a radio, is there a talk permit tone? No, there's not. So those are some of the little idiosyncrasies that you have to brief these guys on when they're operating out of the area and they're in non-familiar territory. Temporary radio systems. Have any of you ever operated a portable repeater or a network of portable repeaters? Jeff Clark over here, he does a lot of wildland stuff. So you set up repeaters and you go out in wildland, you set up, when is that system the very best?
When it's just a single repeater?
How about the last day, because you've had time to fix all the problems that people have been telling you about the whole time. They come back and go, hey man, I didn't have coverage here, I didn't have coverage there, so you go fix it. Well, a temporary system, you think about how long, you got a high school graduate, no, I'm talking about me, not Jeff. High school graduate from Maryville throwing up a system for these guys to cover this, whatever this operational area is. Well, when you look at the system that Phoenix built, the radio system, how long did it take them to engineer it? 5, 6, 7 years, spend $120 million. We're throwing this stuff up, a few hours, a few days, and getting it working. So to have that expectation that's going to work like the system that was engineered over a long period of time versus something that's just thrown together, can't really compare the two. But what it's important to do is when you're operating on temporary systems is have your COML brief the people. Okay, this is a temporary system. Coverage footprint is going to be like it is at home. You may have some issues. So it gets real important to train our personnel on how to operate on the radio, how to hold the radio in front of their face, how to talk. I have a speaker. You ever heard of the Statue of Liberty in radio? So wildland, is your antenna better when it's down low or up high? Way up high. Way up high. So if you have a speaker mic, you take that radio and you take the speaker mic in your hand, you hold that radio up like the Statue of Liberty, and then you talk. Because you're on a temporary radio system, you have to overcome some of those obstacles. The law enforcement that showed up there at Granite Mountain, they had the most wide range of radios. Agencies were assigned a specific tactical objective, and this was, again, coordinating with operations, and they were paired with the local to provide that link to the command structure. This also minimizes the number of swap radios. If you try to hand out cash radios to all these guys, you aren't going to have enough. The other thing that you run into, again, we talked about these officers. If I hand them a cash radio, are they going to be able to integrate it into the system that they have here? No. So fire, we use a Prescott channel for command operations. They had fortunately, I knew the guy up there, gets back to having that little notebook with all your friends in it. Called him up and say, hey, we need something to cover this area. So he goes, hey, we have this repeater that we put up, and we haven't put it in operation, and you guys can use it. So they put us on there. So we use that for our command operations. We also have the objective of backfilling our Prescott and Prescott Valley stations so that they could handle doing the memorial stuff, and they wouldn't have to worry about the fire and EMS calls. So we backfilled those stations for them. And when I say we, it's we, the fire service. There were fire departments from all over the state that were there. But one thing as a COML, I knew that most fire departments are on VHF. So one of the channels I put them on for staging as a common channel was V-Fire 21, State Fire Mutual Aid. So when they showed up, they were able to talk. The other thing we did is we called for cash radios from Phoenix Fire. This is, again, the time and availability. Do they have the time to program? How fast do I need them up here? And it gets down to this technical support thing. There's a lot of guys that are sitting at workbenches and doing programming and stuff. If they aren't there, the rubber doesn't meet the road because rubber doesn't meet the road. So it's important to keep those in mind. Backup plans. Areas of poor no radio coverage, cell phone use, equipment failure. Our backup plan was to use as communications suburban. So it gave us SATCOM relay, satellite phone systems, data systems. We were able to do some video streaming from that. So each remote site, this thing, on a single day, this thing would have to go to multiple sites to support that operation for the day. This guy was a challenge because he was being transported to California. We had to maintain accountability with him from Prescott all the way to California, so we gave them some satellite radio equipment. We were able to do that. We paired up with our DPS partners to find out how to contact DPS and CHP. During the week of the service, we carried out 19 different services. Communications unit, key success were operational knowledge. They had to understand the ICS, the command structure, how that command structure operated, when to coordinate with operations. Technical knowledge, their skills and the technical knowledge, the skills and the abilities. So what technical knowledge do they have, when to employ technical solutions, when to employ swap radios and those kinds of things. The technical resource, have access to that those resources, the communications vehicles, cash radios and those things, having access to that stuff, knowing where it was at. Training, If you have a COML and you just send them to class, go out on an incident like this and you have an expectation of them being able to perform on an incident, that's unrealistic. You need to have them trained up to the point where they're able to handle this when the bell rings. And local knowledge, like I said, knowing that 100-mile radius, the resources and the people. Closing points. Communication, they need to train with operations, and they need to at times use alternate communication systems to get them used to operating on systems that aren't normal for them. Operating on those repeater systems, operating through a gateway, those kinds of things. That provides them with experience, both for the comm unit and for the operational personnel. Gives a chance to break that equipment out and use it, and also creates relationships. Brian said that, one of the issues they have, talked about was you have a civilian guy telling an operational guy what to do. One of the things that we do on review SAR rules, I pair a sworn guy with a civilian person. So we try to minimize that, but it creates those relationships because if a familiar face, it's easier to deal with a familiar face on a stressful incident than it is a non-familiar face. AIRS coverage and capacity, those were some issues, and we never really ended up using AIRS out there. National interoperability channels, knowing where they are, training on them, having all officers know where they are, and training the field personnel how to navigate those radios to get them where they need to be. Statewide communication system, we need one. No questions.
For you. Do we have any kind of a statewide list of all frequencies in the event that, for example, RRT gets deployed and we need to do on-the-fly radio programming after we're leaving town?
For the RRT or Valley RRT?
Well, or the Southern Arizona RRT.
The thing we use up here in this area is we use the National Interoperability, the NIFOG. So all of our RRTs have those capability, those NIFOG channels on that, and we deploy on that. That's written in our RRT file. So if you want to get that, I can get that to you.